Well, in light of a video I made a couple of days ago about mixing different mediums together, I feel like this is actually a good time for me to explore, experiment. So, in my little art reflection that I shared, I mentioned basically mastering how mediums work together. And so, one thing that I've been doing a lot of lately is watercolor with my water soluble wax pastels. And I kind of just been exploring and having fun, and I have learned some things, but I want to sit down and intentionally have a moment where I see, how do these actually work together? Like, what's the result that I would get when I do these things? And I want to make a conscious decision in doing this rather than discovering it in the moment and then possibly forgetting. That way I can know going forward and make better choices when using these two mediums together. So today I have my tiny little palette. I've got my brush. I've got water on the side, probably won't need it, my Caran, and on this piece of paper is where I have the fine details that I am going to show you. So the first detail that I have is going to be the top row. The top row consists of little rows that says pastel on wet watercolor, pastel on dry watercolor, pastel on wet pastel, pastel on dry pastel. Then when we move down here, we have watercolor on wet pastel, watercolor on dry pastel, watercolor on dry white pastel, pastel on dry white pastel. And then down here, just like a couple of color mixing exercises, which I would want to mix all of the colors, but I ran out of room on this page, so I may put some more on here, or maybe it would just be, like another day where I experiment with some more color mixing with my water solubles. So anyway, that is all we are doing today. Nothing extravagant, but just in case there's anyone else who's curious about how these things are going to work together, this is what we are here to figure out with one another. So I hope today you guys enjoyed this video. I'm super duper excited for us to get started, and let's go ahead and do that. So in this first portion, of course, for the parts that say dry watercolor, it honestly doesn't even matter what color I use. I just want to see how the stuff responds. So I am just going to pick a random color. Let's go ahead and pick this blue that I have. And I'm going to just go ahead and put down the dry watercolor options so that way when we get to them, we don't have to worry about moving forward. And I honestly probably should have just used a regular brush for this, but I've already started with this one. So let's just continue on. So now we can give that a chance to dry. For all the things that say dry, I'm just going to go ahead and, I mean, the pastels are going to be dry either way, but I'm going to go ahead and just throw something down on them. So here we have dry pastel, dry pastel. So these really color in so beautifully too. Another dry pastel section. Let's go ahead and do it. Try not to. Okay, dry white pastel. Gonna go ahead and do that now, making sure that my white pastel is actually clean. All right, so all of the dry things are prepared. That's almost dry. So let's go ahead and do pastel on wet watercolor. So I think I am going to take blue. Actually, I'm going to do this green, my Vert Emerald, and we're going to put that over pink. Why not? So first, let me actually no, we're going to put it over vermilion. And I think I'm going to go ahead and wet the paper as well, just to make sure like it actually, the watercolor stays wet for me in time for me to, okay. Right. Okay, there's my wet watercolor. Now I'm going to take my pastel, and in one section, I want to color over it and see what happens. In another, I think, just, okay. Now let me dry my brush and then make lines over it and see what happens. Okay. And then another section, 1 second. I'll just put it along here. Wet my brush a little bit. Okay. So from this little experiment, basically, and here is the natural green color. I'm just gonna put it in there so we can see. So with this natural green color, it's very vibrant, even though it's a deep green. And as I can see, when I put it on top of watercolor, I can still see it, but it does kind of dampen the color a little bit, make it even darker, if you will. And maybe that's just because of the color choice. I don't know. That's something I'll have to figure out in another section. But when I am making the marks, it's clear to see that those marks are going to stay present. It's not something that can so easily just be blended in and not see those lines anymore. So like even here, the shading part around it, like we clearly got this fun color between the mix of the two. However, still see the lines. So really, really quickly, I do just want to try one more color to see if the result is going to be the same as far as like pigmentation, which means I'm probably just gonna, I have to find a random sheet of paper. One second. I found a random section. Just gonna wet the area between these two. Okay, I'm going to try a lighter color. Let's go for my ochre. And let's see what happens with the green when I lay it down. Okay, yeah. So of course, it depends on what color you use underneath, which will change the vibrancy of the water-soluble pastel. Figured, but I still just wanted to see it for myself. So let me go ahead. And even here, you can see that the dominant color is the water-soluble pastel, but clearly there is a mix with the watercolor underneath. Very nice. Now let's get back on track, shall we? So now we have dry pastel on watercolor. So in this part, one of the things that I am going to do is I am going to simply just do the pastel over it. And then with another, I'm going to still add water just to see what happens afterward. Now that it's dry, maybe I also should have used the same color, but that's okay. And personally, I do think there is a bit of a difference still compared to just the color of the pastel by itself. But in this instance, not a whole lot. And I might just be deceiving myself into saying that I'm seeing it. So it looks like when the watercolor is actually drying, there is a lot more vibrancy of this, which makes sense. So now on the bottom, I am left-handed, by the way, you guys, which is why I'm going from right to left. So pastel on dry watercolor. Now I'm going to wet my pastel and see what happens. So still has its vibrancy this time around, but you can see the blue underneath, depending on how much of the crayon the pastel has been put in. So I like that. You can just have whatever undertone you want to have and make it work. So again, just on this little thing here in separation of my pictures, I'm going to put another color and let it dry and come back to it later. So now we have pastel on wet pastel. So what I'm going to do is take, again, this green is pretty much the same color I'm working with. I imagine the experience here is probably going to be like watercolor when you're mixing two wet watercolors together. Let me see. I'll take, alrighty, and here we go. So the pastel is wet. Perfect. Now let's see what happens when I add this. And I am going to split it in half. So just adding it on top like that pretty much just sits on top of the color slightly while not really blending. But let's see when I try to blend them in the moment. It's kind of erasing some of the texture, but okay. So I can still see the shape that I drew in there. Change of color, yes. The ability to mix evenly like you would see more with watercolor without seeing the lines, that's not so much happening. But I do like the fact that I can still see the vibrancy of this color. Like I can still see that it's orange, even though it's been dulled down a lot. I can see that. So now we have pastel on dry pastel. Very nice. Works well. All right, now on this side, let's go ahead and see what happens. Mm. So it looks like the mixing of the colors actually happens a lot better when the first layer of the pastel is dry compared to when it's wet. Interesting. They're mixing a whole lot better. So that's the top row, working mostly with pastels, except for, that. Now we're moving on to the bottom where it's watercolor on wet pastel. So let's try this out. Let me go ahead and, oop, and really quickly, is this dry? Nope, it's still partially wet. Let me go ahead and just wet some of this page. We are going to do Scarlet. That's going to be the color that I use here. And let's go ahead. Okay, now I am going to take some blue watercolor and see what happens. And I think I'm going to use a regular freaking brush for this. Okay, so the color's kind of sitting on top of it a bit, but you can tell, like, they've mixed some, but it's not congruous, I think is the color I'm looking for. It's not smooth. Okay, we'll let that dry, see what it looks like afterward. Now we have watercolor on dry pastel. Again, I am going to use blue because why not? And see how that works. And I probably should have just used all the same colors throughout this whole thing. Huh. I'm going to go outside of that square too, just to see. So it's actually mixing pretty well here. I can kind of sort of still see the line, but not like drastically. So it blended very nicely. So it kind of reminds me almost of the same effect of the pastel on dry watercolor, even though I do think there is just a different level of possible smoothness that could happen between the two. Like the intensity right there, you can see where I really went in with the wax. But when you're putting the watercolor on top of the dry, it looks like it smooths out a lot better. I really like that. Now we're going to do watercolor on dry white pastel. Okay, let's see how this goes. And then we'll do pastel on dry white pastel. And I think we'll actually stop there in this video, and the pastel mixing will be a separate video. We are going to take the vibrant vermilion I used earlier and put that on top of the white pastel. And so they are definitely mixing together, which is not a surprise. It's basically the same result as this, but I just want to see, you know, how the white reacts with these colors. So if you guys heard that, that's my husband laughing at something that apparently was very funny to him. Very nice. And last but not least, pastel on white pastel. I just used vermilion, so I think I'll use the vermilion on here as well. So there it is. If I just go on top of it, it okay. If I push down hard enough, I can still get that vibrant look, or was that on the, but it does come out a lot smoother and still toned down compared to, let me just like put it right there. Can you guys see, oops, the difference in the vibrancy without the white underneath? That's smooth. Here it's smooth as well, but it's still dulled a little bit. Okay, now down here, I will, oops, add water. So getting that same effect, this is a lot thicker in appearance here, I would say. It's also very thick here and here. This isn't dry yet, but it looks like certain areas may be thick, or it could also be thin. So let's wait for this to dry and still wait for that to dry, and we'll come back. I couldn't even remember what I was doing right here, but I think it was pastel on dry watercolor. Anyway, and so of course, if we don't fill that in with the water, then you can see the pink underneath very nicely. Then if I decide, I can mix them a little bit. But again, you still see that pink underneath. Very nice. All right, so we're basically at a point where all of these are dry, and I'm very glad that I did this experiment. I know this is going to take me some time to remember all of these things, but I'm very, very happy. So going forward, I can make more intentional decisions when I am deciding to mix watercolor and pastel together in deciding how I want certain things to happen. Just from looking at this alone, some things I can say that I really, really like are going to be pastel on dry watercolor. Specifically, of course, if I just want to draw on top of it, it looks like the vibrancy of that color will still remain regardless. And you can, choose to really color very closely or leave it more spread out so that you can see the watercolor underneath. But I also like the way it mixes too if I want to, and you can still kind of see a hint of that blue underneath. Very, very cool. Another thing that I do like, of course, is pastel on dry pastel. The mixing of those is very, very nice as far as getting rid of like the lines, like you see here. I actually do like the watercolor on wet pastel when it comes to wanting some more rough or textured things. I think that would be wonderful. But I am a fan of watercolor on dry pastel, like even more so than pastel on dry watercolor. I don't know. And here is another watercolor. I mean, dry pastel. I mean, pastel on watercolor, and I think that turned out beautifully. So I really do like these two things, but especially the watercolor on dry pastel. And it was just cool to see how the white specifically reacts to things. So I'm glad I did this experiment. Looking forward to doing more intentional artwork with this. Hope this was very educational and informative for you guys. And I'll see you next time when we do some palette mixing or whatever video comes next. Wine in.